Tables, please. Grab enough supplies of pizza before you go. I think there was also, drinks in the fridge there if anyone wanted to grab a quick drink before we get started. I'll give you 15 seconds. 14. 13. What comes after 13? 12. 11. 10. 9. 8. 7. 6. It's hard to count when you're up in front of people. 5. 4. 3, 2, 1. All right. We have with us Stephen Rees-Carter, who is going to give us a presentation. I can spoil the title, right?
Yeah, it's on the screen.
Browsers are magical creatures. It's right there. Thank you very much, Stephen. Give Stephen a warm welcome.
Cool, thank you. Where do I stand? Just anywhere around here or somewhere specific? Yeah. Awesome.
The mic is there.
Right, cool. All right. I'll do my best. Okay. All right, so browsers are magical creatures. So what are web browsers? What do they do? I mean, back many years ago when they first were a thing, they were just another app on our computer. You know, we used Outlook for our emails. We used, Solitaire when we were procrastinating from work. We used Word to write our documents. Did anyone use, was it Rees-Carter for like learning stuff? Yeah. And all the floppy disks and all of that nonsense. And then we had this little thing, Internet Explorer or Netscape or whatever it was called back then. And you'd run it occasionally when you need to look at something online, but everything else was through the app. Now, basically everything is a web browser. If you think about it, we do Gmail or Fastmail or whatever our mail client is, most of them are websites through Chrome or Safari or whatever browser you use now. We use Slack, which, yes, is a desktop application, but guess what? It's just a browser. It's a very memory-hungry browser, but it's just a browser. VS Code is a browser. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it, but that's just a web browser. Half the apps that we use now, probably more than half actually, are all web browsers, like Notion's app. Or, anyway, there's a big long list of all the different apps that are all just web browsers. And so web browsers now are everywhere. They do everything. Like our phone, half the apps on your phone, again, web browsers. There's JavaScript everywhere. There's HTML everywhere. And so because of this, web browsers can't just be this simple little app that you use occasionally to do some little things. They have to do everything. They have to be strong. They have to be powerful. They have to support all these different stuff. And they need to have lots of security. Now, when you think about magical creatures and what web browsers could be, Unicorn could come to mind. Magical creature does lots of really cool stuff. I don't have any girls, so I don't know too much about unicorns, but as far as I'm aware, they're, bright and sparkly and do lots of really cool things. However, I think there's a better creature that properly demonstrates what a web browser is, and also I'm a Lord of the Rings fan, so here we go. Balrog. I reckon a Balrog is a much better creature to describe what a web browser is. Also, Greg, they do have wings. We're talking about a powerful creature, a creature that is really hard to defeat, that is really strong. And you want one of these defending your house when you're using the internet, as opposed to a unicorn, although maybe I'm wrong, maybe unicorns are even better. Like I said, I don't have girls, I can't really answer that question. Anyway, so, web browsers, they do lots of really cool things. So, one of the things that web browsers is, they give you heaps of stuff for free. And so, you can just enable these things, usually through headers on your website, and tell the browser how to work and what security features to add. And a great place to start for that is a site that I don't have queued up, but I should have, is this one, securityheaders.com. Open it up. Can everyone see that? It's all good? Cool. All right, so securityheaders.com is a fantastic website that was set up by Scott Helm originally. He recently sold it to proby.com, but I think he still helps them with it. And the point of security headers is you put your website in, and then it'll tell you what security headers you're running. And it uses your industry best practices, the current default headers that exist that you should be using, and it checks if they're there, how they're configured, and tells you if you could do any better. For example, laracon.au, plug for Laracon by the way, we can see we only have 2 headers enabled. There's a bunch of headers that aren't enabled. Who's used SSL Labs certificate checker thing? It's quite a popular thing. I've seen a couple of nods. It's the same sort of thing. It's going to give a rating. So security headers is rating laracon.au at a D, which isn't that great. I love this line. Your site could be at risk. And then they promote their stuff through this Start Now button, but close enough. So that's laracon.au. What about just laravel.com? Same thing. Sorry, Jess. As a side note, when you're looking at sites on this page and you see those 2 enabled and none of the rest of them, and you know it's a Laravel site, you can probably guess it's Forge, because Forge's default configuration gives you those 2, but nothing else. But yeah, so that's securityheaders.com. And as I said, it gives you, this is showing those 6 main headers there. If I scroll down a bit, see here, it gives a bit of information and some links, useful information. Gives you the headers that it saw, so you can kind of debug what's going on. Also gives you like upcoming headers, new things you have to be aware of, more information as well. So let's have a look at this. And what I want to go through is actually enabling all of these headers on a new site, just to show you how easy it is to turn them on. Because most of these are actually really, really easy to enable. It's a really simple thing that you can do, but it significantly increases the security of your app. So, if I can type at an angle. All right, here's a site I prepared earlier that should get a gigantic F. There we go, and I love this one. Ouch, you should work on your security posture immediately. Oops. All right, first one off the list, strict transport security. That's not where I meant to start. Make that. Is that readable? Cool. All right. Now, for all of these headers and a lot of these browser settings and just all this security stuff in general, the MDN web docs, fantastic resource. They tell you so much information. So if you're trying to figure out how to configure them, what the options are, head there first. It's a good place to start. So strict transport security, the HSTS. So this header solves the problem of downgrade attacks. And what I mean by that is when you access a website that is accessible by HTTPS, your browser doesn't know it needs HTTPS. So if you just type in the domain without the HTTPS to start with, it's just going to go through HTTP. And the browser will attempt that connection first. When that fails, if it redirects or if it fails, it might try HTTPS, might try secure. But if you can intersect that connection, you can, if you sit in the middle of the connection, so you've got the user here and you've got the server, if the user has typed in the domain name, say laravel.com without the HTTPS, then the browser is going to try HTTP laravel.com. If you're sitting in the middle, you can intercept the request, and then when it goes off to the server, you can send the HTTPS version over to the server, get the message back, decrypt it, send the unencrypted version modified to the victim. And so the strict transport security header tells the browser you must use HTTPS for this connection. So if you're making the connection to laravel.com and the browser knows that the header is set, then the request will not work over HTTP only. So you can't intercept the request and then downgrade it to HTTP and then send and intercept it and modify it. You have to change it. So the way it works, and because this works on the request that's being sent out, the browser has to remember it. The browser has to store this value. So if we look at the syntax down here, the first one is the only one that's required, which is max age, which is the number of seconds that the browser will remember that setting for. So whenever it hits the domain or a subdomain and it sees this heading, the browser will remember it for that many seconds. So the default, the recommended is about a year, but if you're adding this as for a new site, then maybe start with like a week or a day or something, depending on what you need. And then the browser's going to remember that, so next time it goes back to that site, it's going to require HTTPS, so you can't sit in the middle and intercept it. The problem you've got, though, is the trust on first use problem, the tofu problem, which means that the first time you hit the server, before the browser knows there's this header, it doesn't know it needs HTTPS, and if you're intercepting that, you can just strip the header. So it's completely gone, and that's where the preload comes in. And include subdomains is tied in there as well, which I accidentally skipped. So include subdomains says, for this domain, and there's an angle which is throwing my mouse up. Include subdomains means that any subdomain of the domain also inherits it as well. So if you access like one of the subdomains of this site, or like the root domain, and the HSTS header is there, any of the other domains are going to inherit that as well from the browser. So that's include subdomains. And then preload, we'll get to now. So preload is tied in with the preload list. What was it? It's gcz.net. Enter there, enter a domain. There we go, awesome. Okay, so this is telling us there's no header. So what the preload list is a list of domains that are known to require HTTPS. And in order to do that, you need to add the header on your site with the preload directive in there. And it gives us the required one down there. So I'm going to go into Forge. Let's just show you in action rather than just talk. All right, so here's the header. That's how you add it into your site. That's all you need to do. As I said here, we've got the max age here, so that's a year in seconds. Include subdomains, so all subdomains at sgcz.net will also inherit this. And preload means it can go on the preload list. Now if I go save, wait for that to do its thing. Hopefully Forge doesn't break now because that would be bad for my talk. There we go. All right, and if I refresh this one, should see, oh, that was cached, is it? If I go over here and do this again. What's going on? That did save, didn't it? That is there. Live demos, fantastic. Always do them in talks, you know. There's no downside to live demos. There we go. We're no longer an F and now we're a D. It's working. This wasn't a complete mistake. All right. There we go. All right. So all I did was add the header in that had preload in it, and now the page is green. And now we can actually submit this domain to the preload list. So what the preload list means is that it's a preloaded list and it's stored on GitHub, I believe, at least that was the last time I looked. And Chrome and Safari and Firefox and all the major browsers, when you download them, include the preload list, which means that anytime your browser goes to access a domain on the preload list, it will always require HTTPS. It will never let you access it via HTTP. So there's no way to downgrade it. Even if you've never been there before, the browser is still going to require it. And if you know the .dev extension and the .app extension, they're on the preload list directly, which is why when you register one of those, there's actually a little warning that says you must use HTTPS to use this domain. And that's because of the preload list and security that Google added when they set those ones up. So by enabling this header and adding to the preload list, no one can get to your website without HTTPS, which gives you the full end-to-end encrypted connection, and some people can't, person in the middle attack it, so they can't intercept connections and modify things and then downgrade it on you. All right, so that's the first header. Next one in the list is content security policy, but we'll say that to last because that's going to be painful. No, not painful, it's just complicated. So we'll spend more time at the end. Also, any questions, please interrupt me at any time and shout them out, and I'll be happy to explain anything or if I'm talking too quickly or missing something important. All right, X-frame options is the next one. So, X-frame options down here. It's worth pointing out this is one of the default ones in Forge, as we saw before, so I had to disable it for this demo. What that one does, and we'll go back to our trusty MDM docs, the X-frame options controls what can happen with the site in terms of being embedded in a frame. And so you've got the two options. You've got a deny or same origin. Deny means that this site cannot be loaded in a frame, which would block clickjacking attacks, which I'll show you a demo of that in a second in case you're not sure how they work. And so clickjacking attacks I'll show you, explain it. But yeah, so you use the frame to either block it being found in a frame entirely with deny, or you can use same origin. And same origin says only this site can load this page in a frame, which is really useful if you do some internal framing stuff. It's worth noting that content security policies override this, and they have their own directive to do more complicated things, such as defining what applications can actually load your site in a frame, so we'll get to that shortly. But this one's a fairly easy one. Unless you need frames from your app, then set it to deny or same origin, and that's why Laravel defaults to it, because most apps don't need to deal with frames. So clickjacking attack, if my session hasn't died, there we go. That's what I needed. So this is Potswigger's labs. They have a bunch of free hacking labs to learn different hacking techniques that are really, really good. Highly recommend check them out if you want to learn some more stuff. Unfortunately, they time it really quickly, like in the time it takes for me to set up my talk and then give the talk, the thing is timed out, so I have to reset up a session. So give it a sec, because what it's doing is spinning up a virtual machine or something in order for the demo to work. And everything's going to take longer on the demo, because it always does. Oh, come on. There we go. All right, cool. So what we've got here is a basic little web app thing that we can log into. There we go. We're logged in. Chrome hates the password because the password is Peter. And now go to exploit server. Okay, so this is the application that's vulnerable to a clickjacking attack. It doesn't have any CSRF protection on it at all, and you can frame it in anything you want. Now here's a little exploit server they have set up. It's a different domain. If you probably can't see it because it's pretty tiny, but this one's blah.exploit-server.net. This one is blah.web-securityacademy.net. So completely different domains. Now on this one, I'll just grab my, the little attack. No way I'm trying to live code that one. I need the hash. So what I've got here is, make it a bit bigger. All right. So what I've got here is a frame that loads the My Account page of the vulnerable site. Then we've got some CSS to style it, and then a little div that says please click me. I'm going to go store Wait for that to save. Awesome. All right, and then go view exploit. Cool. All right, so here we have the page. This is on exploitserver.net, which is the malicious site. But in the frame, we have the vulnerable site, the application, which is on the different domain. Now, it's a little bit hard to see, and I'm kind of standing in front of it. But down here, the blue button says delete account. That's the button on the vulnerable site. Over it has please click me, which is the text we have on the exploit site, which is sitting on top of the frame. If I move my mouse over, you'll see that it's responding to the buttons and the fields. And the please click me looks like it's part of the site that we're on, so the malicious site, and the transparency is there so you can see what's going on. But the point is, in a clickjacking account, all you would see would be like the application and your button to click. You wouldn't see the delete account button, but that's what's there. And if I click on the please click me, which I think is on a malicious site, it's actually going to click on the vulnerable site and delete the account. So this is the vulnerable site, refresh. Now I'm logged back out. Try to log in, invalid username and password. So I've just deleted the account through a clickjacking attack, sorry. And so having the X frame header on there would have prevented that from happening, as well as CSRF protection, but we're not talking about that one at the moment. So yes, that's clickjacking attack. That's why you want to have that header on there, or use content security policy in order to block framing. Because frames are really powerful in that regard, if you don't have the protections for them. All right. Oh, did I enable it on here? Probably not. All right, so that one's there. Next up, we have X content type options. Now this is a really simple one, and another one that gets default enabled. Jump back over to its page. This basically just tells the browser to don't try and sniff the type of the file, but trust the type of the file it's reporting. Because you can upload malicious files to sites that say are binaries or viruses or something that the site thinks is, say, a style sheet. And then when it sends it to the browser and it says, here's a style sheet, render it, the browser looks in and says, that's not a style sheet, it's a downloadable file, downloads the file, then it could infect the computer. And so the one setting for this is no sniff. There's not really any reason not to have it, so enable it. Enabling it is a piece of cake. We just add the header like that, no sniff, go save. And then when we go into security headers and refresh it, it's going to come out of screen. There's not much else to say about that, really, just the fact that it's really easy to enable, doesn't really affect anything. Unless you're doing something really strange with content types, then I can't see a downside in enabling it. There we go, up to C. 3 left. All right, next one, referrer policy. This is a fun one. There's a bunch of different options, and this depends what your app does. So this page, as I said, it's a fantastic resource, has all the different options in here. Like we've got the start one, we've got like no referrer, so it just does not recruit any referrer information. This is useful for intranets and things. Like you'll often see if you're in your web analytics, you'll have like intranet.company.com or other entertainingly named subdomains for secure pages that really shouldn't be advertised their existence because they're leaking their referrers. So if you've got something like that, set no referrer, there will be no referrer information sent. The default value is currently strict origin when cross-origin, which means that the referrer is only sent. It sends the full referrer internally for the app. It'll only send the domain name for different domains, and it won't send anything for downgrades to HTTP only. So it's a good default. It's a sane default, but I would recommend setting it anyway, just in case, even if this is what you want, just so if a browser changes what its default is, or a legacy browser that doesn't support it, or something else like that, then you want to have a sane default hard set. But you really want to look into this one if your application shouldn't have you leaking referrer information, or say your URLs have sensitive information in them and you don't want them going out anywhere. So that's that one, nice and easy. 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, next up, permissions policy. I'll just save that in the background. Permissions policy is a relatively new one that a lot of people don't know about. So what it does, and this is pretty good, is it allows you to list the different features that the browser is allowed to let their website use. So these are the standardized features at the moment. We've got accelerometer, light sensor, autoplay, camera, battery, etc., geolocation and such. And so you can use this header to disable any of these features that you don't use, which is really helpful if your site has a vulnerability on it, like a cross-site scripting vulnerability, and someone can inject some code that can maybe do some screen recording or some geolocation or turn on the camera or something like that. And so by having this header on your site, you can prevent vulnerabilities from stealing more information or being used to attack your staff and get into your networks. But it's a relatively new thing. I haven't seen it used much in the wild, and it also does have some side effects. Like if you're using browser extensions that do screen recording, it'll get blocked by this as well. So if you do like client work or help support things, we're using browser extensions that do recording what you're doing on the page or sharing that sort of thing, then some of these are likely to break that. So you need to be careful enabling it. But if you just want to enable everything, you can just do that. So I'm going to go here, select all. There's the policy, copy. Oops. If I find the left click. And then go down in here. Again, like all the other headers, enabling it is really easy. Oh, I've already got it all in here. Easy. Oops. There we go. Enabling it is a piece of cake. It's just another header. Dump them in like that. And then we go save. And then it's going to appear on the list. And so that's 5 out of the 6 headers that we've enabled. All super easy. All of these ones you can do through your web server configuration, like the Nginx config I do in Forge. I see a bunch of clients that'll do it like through middleware on the app, but there's no point if it's not changing. You're deciding this thing once and setting it up for your app or across all your apps. There's no point adding in some custom middleware and adding in that extra layer of complexity and processing time when the web server can really efficiently just add a header onto those responses. So I'd recommend just doing that. Now, there was one more. That's right. We have, you might have seen this one around, XSS protection. This is an old header. Where's it gone? Here we go. An old header that wasn't fully standard and wasn't ever supported in Firefox that was supposed to block cross-site scripting. The problem is it didn't work very well because it's really difficult to detect it. And in some cases, like one of the options is, because mode block just removes what it thinks is cross-site scripting, but this one, filtering, actually could enable cross-site scripting. Like you could manipulate the input so that it tries to filter out the cross-site scripting, and instead it just opens up cross-site scripting and you can attack the account, hack the site. So you don't ever want to use one, it's dangerous. Mode block is not going, it's just going to break the page if it thinks it finds cross-site scripting. Like it'll just stop the page from loading. But the support is being ripped out of browsers, so there's no reason to use it anymore. So that's one to stay away from, even though I see it still gets recommended occasionally from various random security, top 10 things you can do to secure your site list or something, but just ignore it, you don't need it. So that's that one. All right, content security policies. Okay, so now the fun bit. Right, so content security policy. We're going to look at this site here, which is my Laravel security course. So this is my content security policy for my security course. That big block of text there. Is that any better? There we go. Hopefully that's readable enough. So the purpose of this content security policy is to block everything and anything that I don't want on this site. And that's what content security policy is designed to do, is you define the resources that are allowed to run on your site. And so we're talking about scripts, we're talking about styles, fonts, different connections, frames. And we can see the bolded sections are the types of resources that can be allowed in here. And so what I've tried to do with this policy is lock it down as tight as possible, because this course of mine has hacking examples in it, and so there are vulnerable parts of it. But I don't want someone hacking my course to break into my course application, because that'd be really embarrassing. So this is an extra layer of protection, but this is good in general to have. So this is a really strict content security policy, and I'll show you a less strict one in a second. So to start with, and the most important part in my opinion is this top line here. My mouse is not selecting. Anyway, the top line here where it says report URI and then the URL. So the thing about content security policies is it blocks violations to the policy, but then you can tell it to report the violations. And if it reports the violation, then you can collect them and you can read them. So there's no point just blindly blocking things and not knowing what you're blocking, because it could be breaking your application. Clients are reporting weird bugs and why isn't this working? You won't have a clue. By reporting the violations with the report URI, then you can read them and you can see what's going on. And so you can fix bugs or fix issues where the policy is blocking things it shouldn't be, but you can also see attacks in progress. And you can see if someone is trying to cross-site script your account, cross-site script your application, and if they're getting a successful payload that the security policy is blocking, you know there's a vulnerability somewhere. Yes, it's being blocked, but it's still there. Then you can go and find the vulnerability and fix it quickly, rather than wait till you're basically breached and you've got a problem. So that's the report URI. And then if we look down a bit, we've got default source is saying none. So by default, don't allow anything. Connect, source, self, and fathom. You see a common trend here. Fonts, no fonts are allowed. Frames can come from these various domains. So frame source is like frames that it loads on the app. Frame ancestors is frames that can load this app, which is none. So that's the equivalent of the X frame header we had before. The only other interesting thing here, you might have noticed if you know content security policies, is this wonderful line in here, which basically allows JavaScript to run eval, which I really don't like having in there, but I upgraded to Livewire 3. And Livewire 3 pulls in Alpine and not the CSP safe version of Alpine, which needs eval. Which is an unfortunate thing of modern JavaScript frameworks, is a lot of them do use eval, and their founders and maintainers aren't concerned as much about the security aspects of the tools they're using, and they're just trying to make it something work really well. And yes, they do think about security in a lot of ways, but eval still gets used a lot, which is kind of frustrating as a security person, but it's what happens. And there is a version of Alpine that doesn't need that, which I need to get into Livewire at some point. Anyway, minor rant aside. So that's a very strict content security policy. This one over here is a very not strict content security policy. This is what's called a report-only policy. So rather than blocking everything, which can be a problem if you're setting it up on a site that's already established, you don't really want to block everything and have everything break. The report-only policy breaks nothing, but it still sends all the reports. And so you can have the reports sent. In this case, I've got them going to the wizard here, and then it's going to send the reports into the collection, and I can see what's breaking, and then I can build my policy around that. And the wizard here, this is what I use, report URI. And so these are the different reports it's collected, and it's telling me these are the different things that are happening on my site, and so then I can allow or block them and build my content policy from that. So that's reporturi.com, so check that out for doing content security policies. Cool, so that's the CSP, and if we enable that, save, we should get, that's, zooms are failing on me. It should go green. Anyway, it'll go green eventually. I think I'm running out of time, so keep moving. What's next? Cool, all right. So, yes, content security policy is fantastic, but they're also kind of scary, kind of like a dragon. Anyone know that movie, by the way? Yay! Awesome movie. It's an awesome movie. I love it. All right. If you don't know what that movie is, you're missing out. Seriously, I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to figure it out for yourselves. All right. So resource integrity, just quickly, because I think I've run out of time almost. So resource integrity is not a header, but you use it for allowing external resources when you're loading them on the page. And the way they work is, as we can see, this is what Bootstrap gives you when you go to install Bootstrap on your site. The integrity tag here has this hash. And then if the contents of the file here that you're loading doesn't match the hash, it won't load it. Which means that if someone can hack cdn.jsdelivered.net and modify the page, they can add malicious scripts or whatever things in there. If they can hack that, it's going to change the hash of that script, and then your site won't load it, and then you won't get compromised. Now, the British government got hit with this, where they were loading an accessibility helper from a third party. And so someone hacked the third party, the accessibility helper, added malicious JavaScript. I think it was like a credit card keylogger or something into the JavaScript delivered by this accessibility helper, which was being loaded on a bunch of different British government websites. They weren't using sub-resource integrity, so all the British government websites had this keylogger running on them because they were loading their third-party script. So why attack the British government when you're going to attack some third-party company over here with bad security? So by setting the integrity hash on here, if anyone changes the source, then it's going to be blocked, it's not going to work anymore, and it keeps your site safe from attack. And the way to set that up is the SRI hash generator. If it doesn't already come with it, like Alpine annoyingly doesn't give you it by default. It just gives you this. Thanks, Caleb. All right. So we can go directly to the URL, and we'll see here that unpackage actually gives us the full versioned URL. We can just dump that into the generator hash. There we have it. We now have a very safe script tag we can include, including the hash on our site. And if anything changes on that version, it will just block it from loading. Is that a question?
Yeah, I've used this before, and I've found some people update quite a lot.
Yep.
Have you found a way of monitoring so you can monitor when people change things instead of
Could you just slightly repeat the question for the
Yeah, sure. So the question is, some people update their sources a lot, and how do you monitor that to keep your site updated? I don't know. The best thing I can recommend is go to GitHub and then turn on announcements for releases. Because generally, often if they're going through GitHub, they'll do new releases for each of their updates. And then GitHub will give you send the announcement, then you have to send it through. That's the best I can think. There's no other way I can think to do it, unless like Unpackage or something would have a way of doing release updates, announcements. Yeah, if you load it locally, then yeah, you don't have that problem. If you like using Node npm to load it in. Was that? Yeah, well, that's the other thing. As Greg said, because this is pinned to a specific version, unless there's a bug in this version, your site's not going to break. Everything is going to be fine. Unless, of course, that gets compromised with something malicious. As long as they're updating their versioning properly, nothing will change. And so you could be using a really old version of Alpine on your site, but as long as the version of Alpine you're using doesn't have any bugs or vulnerabilities that affect you, do you really need the latest version? And given it's a JavaScript thing like that, there's limited scope for what it can do. It's not like it's a server-side plugin which has a bit more scope. But it depends on your app as well. But yeah, that is one of the downsides of pinning it. But I think the security of using integrity outweighs the downsides of having to update it. So that's SRI. I was going to talk about, do I have any more time or do I need to kind of wrap up?
I'm not sure what the schedule is.
I'm just running up.
I'll just quickly do some cookies and I'm done.
Yeah, go, okay.
All right, same-side cookies. So, anyone heard of same-side cookies? Yes, I'm nodding. Awesome. Same-side cookies are a way of controlling when cookies are sent in requests. Because the problem you've got is if you've got malicious side over here, sending faked requests over to the legitimate side over here, say in the background via fetch or something, or just via forms, the browser, the server over here doesn't know it's a forged request. So the user goes and visits the malicious site, thinks they're doing something over here. In the background, the malicious site is sending forged requests over to the target site, which the victim has an account on, and they can do whatever they want. The victim doesn't know. So this is why you have CSRF protections, CSRF tokens, cross-site request forgery tokens, and same-site cookies are designed to help solve that problem as well. Because although in Laravel we get CSRF tokens by default and they're enabled and they're really good, a lot of frameworks, a lot of websites just don't have them because they don't know how to implement them. So it's one of the cool things about Laravel really is we do get that automatically. So the browser's implemented same-site cookies to try and solve this problem. And so the three options you've got are none, lax, and strict. None works the same way as without any same-site cookie, which means that the cookies are always attached. Actually, I've got these diagrams, this will work better. All right, so when you've got same-site none set, and this is HTTPS only, so it needs a secure flag set on the cookie as well, it doesn't block anything. So all requests going to the victim site will include cookies. Doesn't matter if they're embedded in frames or images, or if they're unsafe requests, they put post, delete, etc., or get and head. They all include the cookies. So you don't want this by default because it can enable cross-site request forgery attacks. Why is it green? Because the requests are going through.
Okay.
There we go.
Green, bad, red, good.
Yeah. Go me. I've never noticed that before. Thank you. To fix it. All right. Same site strict at the other end of the spectrum doesn't allow cookies to be sent at all. So it blocks all the cookies. So that's why because they're blocking all the cookies. See? Yes, I had a. Yeah. Anyway, strict blocks all cookies any cross-site requests, which is requests that go from a site over here to a site over here when they're a different domain name, which means that frames can't embed things and have cookies attached. You can't do post requests from forms. You can't even get requests. The cookies won't appear. So the first time you land on the site, if it has same-site strict set, the cookies just won't go. And so you'll be logged out until subsequent requests. The middle ground and the default is lax. Lax only gives you the cookies on the safe requests, which are the get requests, which you shouldn't be doing anything on. If you do, stop. You need to do all your actions on post or put delete, because then same-site lax will prevent the cookies from going over. So you can't have the malicious JavaScript running in the background or random form submissions that are doing forged cross-site requests through there. Yeah, so there, those three. So lax is the one you really want. Unless you're doing something very specific, like some banks might go down the path of strict, but generally you just want lax, unless you need to have cross-site requests coming from different domains, in which case you want to look at none and have other protections like CSRF tokens or other mechanisms in place to protect those things. But generally you want lax because it gives you a good amount of security.
Question.
Yep.
The concept of same site.
Yep.
it's like just one web server, so it's the host name plus your domain name?
Yes, the same site is based
I've got
on...
two servers in
Yep.
the same domain sitting next to each other. They're not the same site.
Same site is based on the root domain. So it includes subdomains. So your a.site.com and b.site.com are considered the same domain because they're both part of site.com, which means that same site cookie lax and strict will work between different subdomains on the main domain, which is, helpful when you've got a complicated app that does different subdomain work. But it is a reason why you want CSRF tokens, because if someone can compromise one of your subdomains, they can use that to bypass same site cookie protection to get to other subdomains. But different domains, like site.com and hello.com, they're not the same site, and so that's where this comes into play. And if you're thinking of sites like github.io, which you can have subdomain.github.io, there's a list called the prefix public suffix list, I think it is, which is used to define all like the public domains that have public subdomains to them, and so they're not considered the same site. So valoran.github.io and laravel.github.io are not considered the same site, and so I can't do same site attacks again, from mine onto the Laravel one, for example, because they're on the public list. So if your application does have any sort of public subdomains where users can have their subdomain and do their own thing, you need to look at the public suffix list and get it on there, because same site attacks could be done through that. All right, and the only other thing I was going to mention briefly are these wonderful things which make my head hurt. They make my head hurt. It's complicated. A lot of apps don't need to worry about these things, but if you do, then my recommendations are enable them slowly and only enable the minimum that you need, rather than try to configure everything to start with. So for those who aren't aware of what CORS is, it's basically allowing requests in the browser between different domains, and if you allow credentials to go through and what headers and methods can be used. So rather than just blanket open everything, open the minimum amount of things and slowly build up so that you don't accidentally open too much. Otherwise you can bite yourself in the, get caught in a dragon's mouth. Again, also movie, if you haven't seen it, you're missing out. Figure it out for yourselves, I'm not telling you. What was that? No. No, it is not. Also these ones, another lot of confusing acronyms. They're there for allowing complicated browser features that got locked down through the Spectre and Meltdown that had memory issues and things like that. So if you need these, you'll know about it and you'll have to configure them carefully. Most people don't need to care about these things, but they are a thing that do exist, that give you some advanced features. Yeah, I think I'm done. Thank you very much.
Any questions for Stephen?
I'll ask a question.
Yep.
Why should we not do what Forge does? What is the scariest things that could happen to our websites?
Can you repeat that?
Okay, the question is, why should we not do what Forge does? What's the scariest things that could happen?
Why should we add more security than the default Forge, for example?
Yeah, all right. So by default, let's just look at a default Forge one quickly. All right, so default Forge gives you this. It doesn't have strict transport security, which means that you can downgrade attack a site running on Forge that doesn't have that set. So for example, Laravel.com, you could downgrade attack and then do a redirect to, React or something, which would be fun for comedic value. Content security policy, again, if you don't have that, well, if you get cross-site scripting running on the Laravel website, you could, run some JavaScript on the Laravel website. It does all sorts of fun things. Move the documentation around or add typos or something. I don't know. Yeah, cross-site scripting is bad. Come on, we all know this. Referrer policy, that one's useful generally if you have like an internal application of some sort and you don't want to leak information. By default, it's not as important as the other two. Permissions policy, again, not as important. So these two aren't overly important in the grand scheme of things, but they're helpful. This one, referrer policy, is especially helpful if you have an internal site. But if you're running it on Forge, it's probably not an internal site. Still, it's good to have. But yeah, the main two that you really need to care about that Forge doesn't touch are these two. And I understand why. I mean, that one's tricky to enable unless you know the site doesn't need HTTP. Although Forge does default configure everything HTTP, so it really should do it. Maybe I'll annoy James about that. Because it's security policy, Forge can't do that by default, although it could, can't do it by default just the way the nature of it. So
It's kind of a UI to like encourage you towards it.
it could be, but you'd want to do it through the application rather than through Forge.
Right.
But yeah, configuring strict transport security and these other things you could do through a URI in Forge, and I shall annoy James about it. It's still his job, right?
Yes.
Awesome. I shall annoy James. Cool. Any other questions? Yep.
If you're using a content security uses like Google Tag Manager or
Yep.
advertising, that can get a bit hairy, right? Because the source of that content could be
Yep.
any number of places that you have no idea until it happens. Right?
Yeah, there are different. There are different. Sorry. The question is, if you're using like Google Tag Manager and other complicated third-party includes, it can make content security policies complicated. And yes, there are different directives you can use that allow it to inherit things, or you can use nonces on includes rather than having to specifically mention domains. For example, in this one, I've got. No, that's Shah's the inline. There's a nonce here, so it says you see that it has the nonce and then nonce over here and then the hash. And so if this nonce hash is sitting as an attribute on included script tags, then they're allowed as per the policy without having to be specifically in the policy. So you could do that to allow the Google Tag Manager on your site, and there are other things like that to do. But the downside is, of course, if you're allowing something like that, then anything that it pulls in, there's a potential for it to be compromised. And SRI, you can't use sub-resource integrity on something like Google Tag Manager because it changes. So it isn't a risk you have to accept if you use any sort of third-party things like that. And like payment gateways, again, you can't use SRI on those. Some analytics things as well, they're not static scripts, so you can't use it on those. So anytime you're using a script you can't use SRI on, and you can't easily put a content security policy thing in, you need to be aware of the risks of them being compromised.
Or blocked, right?
Yeah.
Because they just won't be in your list.
Yeah, you could block. Yeah, or you could just block them if you want to block them. Yeah.
I think you can warm up to the CSP by just logging in DevTools
Yep.
and monitor that to see what would be blocked without
Yes.
blocking it, and then block it once you're satisfied.
Yeah. The thing was, you can warm up to your CSP policy by getting alerts rather than blocking. This is what the wizard is that I was quickly mentioned before. Is on my site here. I've got the read-only content security policy. So any violations go into this list rather than blocking it. And then I can go through this list and I can say, yes, I use Fathom, so I want that. I use SendStack, I want that. I have no idea why YouTube is on there. I honestly don't. But images, we can allow our own images in Fathom. Manifest files, sure. We can allow scripts. Why is Facebook on my site? No, I know why that is. Facebook is on there because the Facebook embedded browser adds its scripts to every page you visit when you're using it, which is a horrible, horrible blight. So don't allow that. CSP will block it. Yay. Why is that on? That's a browser extension doing stupid things, so I'm going to ignore that. SendStack, yes. Cloudflare, yes. All right. Curious. I wonder why that one's there. I mean, that's my wife's site, but I don't know why it's on my thing. There's something, anyway, so this demonstrates perfectly that if there's something weird going on your site, the content security policy will tell you something weird is going on and you can investigate further and I can figure out why that's there. I've got Google, wait, do I have Google? Oh, anyway, the point is, I'm getting distracted.
Time to be changing your security policy.
But the point is, using the wizard here, I can select the things that should be there, I can go add selection, and then if I go over here, report URI has built me my policy. So now this is a new policy I can put up there. And then I can still keep this report only, upload this one, and it's going to keep reporting new violations. And I can do multiple iterations over weeks or even months of building my policy based on actual live data from the site while nothing gets broken. And some people never leave report only. Sometimes they just use report only and just monitor results and build the content security policy around that. So nothing ever breaks. But as long as you're monitoring it, you're aware of what's happening on your site, even though it's not being blocked. It still gives you that visibility. CSPs are awesome. I love them. So if you want to ask me more questions, happily I can talk all day about them. So find me after if you want to talk more about them.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Okay.